All right, guys, I did a job this week, and it involved taking these mounts off of a yard dog for a trucking company, and we got some videos of the arc gouger process, and I was getting ready to post them, and I thought it would be a good time to kind of go over some of the tips and stuff that goes through my mind as I'm arc gouging. The industry that I used to work in, we used arc gougers a lot, doing demo work, removing welds, or we'd gouge into bad welds to make repairs, and it is just a very, very valuable process, and it's something that, you know, I don't think it would be too hard for somebody to pick up on it, especially if you have a little bit of welding knowledge, but there's just a few things that you could know that would really help you out. A lot of people you hear, they want to talk about gouges, they want to talk about, oh, you're gonna get burned up, oh, it's gonna burn your clothes all up. Well, that's true if you're in some tight places and it's hard to get away from the fire, the sparks, but typically those guys probably never did get shown these tips. On this gouger, in the holder there's holes. The main thing, the biggest tip that I could give anybody is, and it's kind of hard to explain if you're just talking to somebody on the phone or something. All right, whatever way that rod, right now, the holes are below that rod. So depending on which way I flip this rod this way right now will depend on which way I can move with this holder. And I'll kind of explain that to you right now. So the holes have to stay behind the rod, whichever way you're traveling. So right now, the only way I can go is pushing this way. If I tried to turn this gouger back this way and come this way, it's not gonna gouge right. It'll gouge, but it's not gonna work as efficiently. And so if this mount was sitting right here, the holes are behind the rod, I would set up on it and push the gouging rod this way. The more angle you get, I mean, the better it does sometimes, but I mean, a lot of times I'll be straight in and it does just fine. Now, if I had to say I gouged down this side and now I need to gouge this way, well, if I'm in the moment, what I'm gonna do is loosen up on the holder, flip this rod, slide it back, and then I'm gonna be ready to travel this way. I reposition the holes behind the rod. So if I come around this way, gouging, I gouge all that material off, the reposition, the holes are still behind the rod, so I can still travel down this way. But the next tip that I could give you is, it's not, you know, welding, if you were welding this up, you could fire up right here and you could weld along and you could look in front of that rod. Or if you're welding, you can look behind the rod. Either way with welding, you can kind of get away with looking in front or behind the electrode. But with gouging, you're looking for, when I'm gouging this off, I am looking for the fusion line to where this part, and I like to come in above the weld, so if I'm gonna gouge this off, I'm gonna be taking off more material on the part normally, and I'm looking for where the fusion, where this material meets the base metal. If you're in front of this rod and you're pushing it this way, for one, you're catching all the sparks coming off, but for two, you can't see that fusion line that we're talking about. So if you're ever gouging, you have to, I'm not gonna say you have to, but 90% of the time I do, is I'm looking behind where I'm removing the weld or metal. And as soon as you see that, as soon as you get to the point, typically you'll see it. It's a lot harder on stuff that's fabricated where there's really tight fits. If you're gouging something and it's a loose fit, you know, there was a little bit of a gap there in the beginning, you can see it plain as day. As soon as you hit it where that gap is, you know you've gouged enough material. But it can be tricky sometimes. You hear a lot of people saying they don't like gougers because they gouge in too much. And that's easy to do. If you're gouging, it's not hard to take off too much metal, say on this table, if it was welded to this table. But what I'd like to do is, if that weld is coming down, I like to aim for the top side of that weld, go through the weld and almost getting into behind the weld. And once you get to where you think the fusion line is going to be, you know, I'll kind of start combing it out. What I would describe as combing it out, just kind of feathering it. And once you find it, you kind of realize where you're at, and then you can gently move forward. If you start just gouging into it, you'll miss it. And next thing you know, you're in too deep. I mean, you could be in too deep a 1/4 inch before you really know it. It's not that hard to do. But once you get to that point, what I like to do is kind of go slow. And when you're coming down on that fusion line, fusion zone, you don't want to get into it quick. You want to almost get it real thin and let the gouger just kind of melt it away. Just let it go. If you're coming in here real hot and heavy, if you're doing that little weaving motion, it's just hard to see for me. I like to get in there and gradually move along, and you can, on stuff like this, it's this fusion, when I was gouging this off, it's very faint. It is very faint, and you'll miss it. But it's just something that takes practice. But the main two things is, you know, keeping your holes on the right orientation and looking behind the rod. And another thing I'm gonna point out in the video I'm gonna put up with this is when you're gouging and you're in there in the joint, and say you gouged in a 1/2 inch or 3/8, and you've got to stop or reposition, or the welder kind of cuts out on you, because sometimes it's hard to keep it going good. Don't stick this rod all the way back into where you just were. It'll just want to stick and sputter, and it won't want to get started. If you'll notice, every time I stop on the video, I pull out and let it get started on the front edge, and then I'll kind of work that back into and pick up where I left off. That's just something I developed over the years, and all of a sudden I kind of realized that that's what I did when I was helping somebody else gouge. I shared that little technique with them. I kind of really didn't realize I did that, but it does help on getting it started, because it don't matter. You could have the biggest welding machine out there. We worked in the plants and had giant welding machines and smaller gouging rods like this, and sometimes you'll be gouging on something that's just hard to get it lit. It just wants to stick and stuff, you know, stick on you. This job on the video, I was running 200 amps, and this was a 1/4 inch electrode or carbon. I like 1/4 inch carbons. I'll use 3/8 on my bigger machine, and I also like the rectangle carbons. I used to use those in the plants a lot for putting on bevels, but they're good for you know, skimming off weld. Like when I gouge this away and this gets gone, well, I'm still gonna be left with that weld that I came over the top of. And you know, you'll want to skim it away instead of having to grind it. And those rectangle electrodes, they work out good for that. I know there's some more tips, but I'm gonna put up the video and let y'all watch through that, and maybe this will help y'all out.